Welcome everybody to what will be episode 212 on the which way am I pointing today? CX-CC YouTube channel. Hi, I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. And before we get started with our super special guest, I just want to press all the right buttons to thank our Patreons because their emotional and financial support is always appreciated. You can join our Patreon at the free level or paid levels. We're happy to see you either way. I think a third of our members are paying, so it's totally optional. Patreon.com/CXCC. And other than that, of course, I recommend you subscribe to our YouTube channel at CX-CC. And if you want to check when our future events, webinars, and other things are, check out our calendar, cxcc.to/events. And with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's say hello to our guest, Rebecca. Dr. Rebecca Grier, tell us all about you.
Hi, thank you for having me, Debbie. I usually start by saying that I am a scientist and I have never wanted to be anything but a scientist. And it is through that I have evolved into UX research, which I've been doing for 20 years under different titles as the career discipline has changed. Yeah, that's a good enough start for now.
That's a pretty good start. So I know that today you're the first of our new series about getting to know people's jobs. Because what I find is that sometimes newbies are curious about, is this a job I'd want to do? And sometimes our coworkers don't really know what we do. So I wanted to create a series that would explore different types of jobs. So we have you down as researcher and change agent. First, can you tell us a little bit more about what does that mean?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm a scientist. I think of myself first and foremost as a human factors engineer, scientist. So I have my PhD in human factors psychology, which is the study of how people interact with technology and then the use of it to make technology that is user-friendly. And throughout my career in human factors, UX research, whatever the term du jour is, I have noticed that I have often been a person who has been asked to explain to others why do they need to care about the users? What is this human factors or UX research? So starting with my time back in the US military and in a consulting firm at Ford, I really pushed them to think about people with disabilities and the autonomous vehicle. Most recently, I took a job at Microsoft a few years back to lead a culture change effort to make product making there more customer centric. And so even though I really do consider myself a behavioral scientist specializing in human factors or UX research, a side part of my jobs have always been about explaining why this is important and getting people to adopt a more human-centered product-making mentality.
Okay, got it. So it sounds like in the course of being a researcher or working in UX roles, you've ended up having to try to create some process or mindset or other changes?
That is correct, yes.
Right, so it's not like you have the title, it's not like your job title says change agent. It's just something you've ended up doing. You're just naturally influential.
Yeah, I don't know if that depends on who you ask, I guess.
Dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that starting at one job, they asked me to complete this personality profile, which I then proceeded to explain why the psychometrics of such things are bad and we shouldn't be doing those and such. But they're like, well, we understand that, but it's just for fun, just so people can get a sense of who you are. And one of the characteristics that you could be on this one was woo. And they're like, we've never had anybody in woo. And in woo is essentially change agent influential. And I attributed it to the fact that I grew up moving around a lot and was always the new kid someplace. And so that I had to learn how to say, hi, I'm Rebecca. Please be my friend. I'll add value to your life, I promise.
A lifetime of adding value. That's an interesting one. So I think not everybody who watches our webinars and channels is totally familiar with human factors and human factors engineering. Can you give us the medium-sized version on what that is, and is it different than UX?
It depends. Well, I'm going to answer the second part first. It depends on who you ask. I am actually, anytime I hear somebody say that human factors and UX are different, they always say it's overlapping. But whenever they say it's different, I ask them to explain to me the differences, because I don't see any differences. When I started my career, my title was human factors, and it was at the company that is now AT&T. And the team, my coworkers from that team still are working there. They're still on the same team, but that team is now called, and they're still doing pretty much the same stuff we were doing back then, different technologies, of course, but now they're called the UX team. So to me, there isn't a difference. Human factors is a field that is considered interdisciplinary, grew out of engineering, psychology, computer science. Computer science was added in later. Biomechanics, ergonomics was added in, as well as design being added in at some point as well. But it was really started kind of around World War II as a discipline, when there were all sorts of accidents happening with high-tech warfighting. And the militaries around the world, mostly Britain and the United States, brought in psychologists to create training to improve performance. And they said, well, first we need to look at what's happening. Why are these mistakes being made, so we know how to improve the training? And then they said, you know what? It's the design of the technology. It's not the training that's bad. And they introduced things like skeuomorphism and other things into this. And then industry started hiring, and at some point it became human-computer interaction, and usability became terms. And then UX is now the term for that study of how humans interact with technology, and the design of technology that's user-friendly.
Thank you for that. That was great. I've always been very excited about that, and I often wonder if I had a time machine and could go back to university, should I have done that? So I'm kind of excited for you that you did that. So thinking about working in kind of a research position in which you might have the opportunity to make change or influence people, is it ever a hard sell to a company like, hi, I'm not just a researcher, but I might try to come in and make things better?
I don't know if it's a hard sell to a company, because usually I don't go into jobs unless somebody's hired me specifically to be a researcher. I might then be asked to convince more people that it's a good thing. And there are people who find it a hard sell, who don't want to change and in anything. But usually, I have a great 1 hour session that I love to do with folks, with engineers, to kind of convince them that, hey, we actually do know a lot about how the human brain works, and we need to think about how our users' brains work instead of how an engineer's brain works. And when we're designing technology, and when I show them these kind of mistakes, if either in this 1 hour session or just over the course of a day, then they kind of start to see how things can get better. Even having them watch usability tests or user research studies, and watching, I remember back in the day when I worked for the phone company and somebody threw a cell phone across the room in anger because they were so frustrated with the tasks we had asked them to do with it. And somebody's like, an engineer said something like, well, they didn't know, they're dumb. And I was like, well, yeah, but we sell to everybody on the planet. So you want their money or not? We can make the technology, we can either sell to a smaller market of people, or we can make it easier to use.
Yeah, we'll check their Mensa membership before they're allowed to get a cell phone. So as I've got a couple of more questions for Dr. Rebecca, if anybody else has questions about the work of a researcher and change agent, please put them in the chat. If you're watching the YouTube video later and you've come up with questions, ask them. If I can't answer them, I will track down Rebecca and get you an answer. So tell me a little bit about when you're doing research and maybe some influencing or change agent work, what might a day-to-day or week-to-week kind of work look like?
It's one of the reasons I love this job is that it's never the same thing twice. It really depends. So there could be times where I'm sitting around with engineers and understanding their trade-off decisions that they're making, or a product manager and what they're thinking about, and providing insight into how different approaches might be good or bad for end users. There could be days where I'm planning a study and trying to figure out how to answer questions about what people will do with a technology that doesn't exist yet. Could be days that I'm just actually thinking about like I remember working on the autonomous vehicle and just thinking about, okay, how could this go wrong? What things could happen with the vehicle? What things could a person want to do? Reading horror stories about taxis online and stuff like this, and then trying to figure out, how do I want the system to respond, or what would I think that would be the right way for the system to respond going forward. The other days I could be talking to end users or customers or asking or watching them do things, and then writing that up and presenting it to the team and starting over again. And then on the change agent side, like I said, I could be having sessions where I'm leading sessions where I'm having folks watch customers and have them have those interactions and those realizations that people act differently, or telling them stories about certain segments of the population so that they start to care about that segment of the population and understand that what we're designing doesn't work for that segment. I think that's enough.
That was great. I'm totally riveted. And again, I welcome questions from our audience today. If people have curiosities related to being a researcher or change agent, is there any, and again, you don't have to name any particular job or situation, but do you ever have like a go-to tool or phrase or PowerPoint deck or something you do when you feel like I am hitting a wall and people just aren't hearing me right now?
I mean, a lot depends on what they're not hearing me about. And so if I'm trying to convince them that, caring about users is important, I will, and I have a little bit of time with them, I love to show them the Stroop effect or the monkey illusion. So the Stroop effect goes back to the 1930s, where somebody decided, I can't remember his name. Oh, his name is Stroop. Why didn't I think of that? His name is Stroop. He did this fascinating study where he had people read random words that were printed in colored ink. They didn't actually read those words. I say they read the words, but they were to say the color of the ink the word was printed in as quickly as they could. And then he gave them, change those words to actually being color words, but they still had to say the color of the ink the word was printed in. And then he also had symbols.
The same. Like, so the word red might say purple, but be in red.
But yes, exactly. And and then also where it was just the color was printed and no words. And he found that people were much, 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 much faster when it was just saying the color of a splotch that was on there than when it was a word or when it was the color word. And showing people that, like, you think naming a color of ink is not a hard thing, but we can't turn off reading. It is something automatic in our brains. It does not go, if you've learned reading to be fully literate in whatever your native language is, you can't turn it off. You can't stop the reading happening. You don't see the line in the little bubble. I've been trying to teach my son how to read and stuff like this. And so, like, he sees, a line in a bubble for a B. He doesn't see the letter B yet. Well, he does now, but a couple of years ago, he didn't. And so, but there will be a point where he can't turn off the reading. And that happens to everybody when we learn to read. So showing people that, hey, even though this task is easy for you now, it isn't, that's because of your skill set. And then the same thing with the monkey business illusion. And they, we can, the best way to say it is if you've ever watched a movie repeatedly and you've noticed something later on in a different watching of it, a blooper or something like that, that's the monkey business illusion. We can't take in all of the information that is being bombarded to us. And so our brain filters out and says, this is important, this isn't. And the more, but once you've seen it, and once you've seen that blooper in the movie, then you can't unsee it. And so that helps to show the difference between end users and engineers who are working day to day, every day on a problem and creating a new technology, and like, well, how come they can't see that? Well, because they haven't been working in it day to day, every day. They're seeing this little piece of it. But there's a lot of different...
Just for the people who might go and look these things up, if I remember correctly, the monkey business one was where somebody's doing something over here and someone wearing like a gorilla suit walks through the background, but nobody notices the person in the gorilla suit because their attention is somewhere else. Is it that one?
Yeah, so there's a group of people playing basketball. Half of them are in white shirts. Well, not playing basketball. They're playing with a basketball. Half of them are wearing white. Half of them are wearing black. You're asked to count the number of passes between the white players. When you're doing this, and by whites, the people in white shirts, just to be clear, and a monkey or gorilla suit comes by. Most people don't see it. About half the people don't see it unless you've seen it before or you're looking for it. But even if you've been trained to look for it, if you're looking for it, you can't count accurately the passes. Your brain can do one of those two tasks, paying attention to everything or counting, and it's really hard for it to do both.
We feel, just minutes ago, seemingly, one of my favorite bands put up a new video on YouTube, and they claimed it was one of their recent live concerts that we were physically at. So, of course, what are we looking for? We're looking for ourselves in the audience. And we started noticing that the edits of the concert, something didn't make sense. And we started having that gorilla thing because we started noticing one woman is standing over here singing, and seemingly a microsecond later, she's on the other side of the stage, but then she's back over here. And obviously, they'd cut multiple concerts together, but we were experiencing a little bit of that ourselves today. So everybody notice that in your day-to-day and in other things where your attention goes, and then something that just kind of bumps you on the head. We have a great question in the chat that I'm going to read out loud. It says, hello, question from me. How do you approach the necessary trade-off between user centricity and business centricity? Or I'm going to adjust that question and say, instead of a trade-off, can you find the balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, if your users aren't happy, then your business isn't going to be happy, depending on what it is that your business is. And somebody will find that unmet need. But there are prioritizations in terms of knowing what is the thing that is a critical error that is going to prevent somebody from being able to accomplish this task? What's something that's a hassle factor, meaning that if they're having a great day, they're not going to care that this thing was a little bit hard to do, or that they had to click a couple of times, or that they had to search for this. But if they're having a bad day, for whatever reason, it might be the straw that breaks their back and they give up on the task. And then there's the thing that's, what are the things that are like delighters that would go, ooh, somebody really thought about how somebody like me would use this system. So prioritizing, number one, and figuring out what is actually critical, what if you're in a more safety critical area, like medical or military or other things, what could cause something to go boom and break badly and frequent and is likely to happen versus, what errors are, I can recover from that error. So that's number one, is the prioritization. And then the second one is looking at feasibility. And that's where that having the conversations with engineers and user researchers being embedded with the engineers to sit there and go, this is the unmet need, or this is the customer requirement, the user requirement. How can we do this? And looking at what are the multiple ways that one can solve that problem, and figuring out what is the one that meets cost and timeline goals the best, and then which one can we, in a lot of businesses, monetize the best versus, and that is how you find that balance. You make sure you're meeting all of the critical needs in some way that helps the business meet their needs.
Just going to say, in the course of being a change agent, have you ever had to have some of those conversations where you say, hey, look, we can focus on these business goals and the growth and the more users doing more of X, but if we don't build the thing that makes sense for the people, we're either not going to get those outcomes or we might get them unethically. Have you, no companies named, have you ever had to have some of those conversations, especially with your change agent hat on?
I do recall conversations where I said, if we didn't do this, we could have big problems later on legally.
Sure.
So yeah, I think I tend, even though it's a good question, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head, because I think I always try to frame everything in terms of the business goals. And if the business goal is to increase sales or increase usage of a system, then I say, if we don't do this, we're not going to be able to sell. We're going to have less users, that kind of a thing. I thankfully have not been put in a situation where, yeah, you'll increase this KPI, but you'll do so at harm to the customer. And I have not, but I know colleagues who have. So.
Yeah, I was going to say you're very lucky. I want to work for you. No, luckily my current job, when my current job interviewed me, they said, "What's one of the top things you're looking for in your next job?" And I said, "Ethical." Like, I feel so badly that I even have to say that, but I feel like in some cases we do.
Yeah. It's a hard one.
Yes. Okay, great. We have another question from live attendees. Doug, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing people's names wrong. Our previous question was Dinora. Sorry if I'm pronouncing you incorrectly. I make everyone either very American or very Italian. Doug says, hi, how to manage expectations to use the latest and greatest technology or a buzzword, even if not analyzed, that they actually add value. Like, are we giving a good user experience? I feel an AI vibe here, but how do you manage expectations when people want to use latest, greatest buzzword du jour, even if we're not sure they add value or no, they don't?
I struggle.
I'm Swedish. I'm Swedish, by the way, I should mention. Not Italian, not American.
Okay, I still won't know how to pronounce your name, but thank you.
Doug, I struggle with this one a lot, because as a human factors engineer, one of the core things that I like to do is task analysis, function allocation. And that is looking at, what does the user do now to solve this problem? Or is it a new problem being created because we're adding technology in and we have to figure out how the user is going to use it? What are their humans' information requirements? First off, what are the things that the technology does well, and what are the things that the human does well? And when I say well, that doesn't just mean one-time happy path, but looking at the reliability of the technology, or how much a human is going to have to interact with it or not interact with it, and then saying, and so I try to present a total system performance aspect of it. And so, is new shiny technology really adding value now? Or do we see it adding value? Or is it just changing what the human does and making the total thing less reliable in the long term? So I really try to emphasize that whole function allocation piece of it. I'm not going to say that I'm successful with it all the time, because there is a lot of push for shiny new technologies, and people pay for shiny new technology, not behavioral science, and function allocation. In some cases, you can convince them that total ship. I've got a story in my head that's why I went there, but total system performance is there. I was fortunate enough to work on a Navy ship that was a first of its kind ship. And one of the key features of this ship and its design was that it was going to use human factors from beginning to end and reduce the number of crew. And we did this by doing function allocation, by looking at what automation could exist in the time that we developed the ship, because it can take 20 years to design a ship, and how reliable was that technology, how much was it really reducing workload of humans? How many humans would need to be doing what things? How do we actually create enough work to keep humans engaged? Because oftentimes when something's heavily automated, they actually performance goes down because the human doesn't sit there as a backup. So every decision that was made on that was about total system performance, the socio-technical system. So, how likely is a human to make an error with this new automation? How likely is this automation to fail? Oops, that's not a good combination. And we would do modeling of it. You're not going to get that in agile sprints, unfortunately. It takes too much work to do those things. But if I was put into a situation where I felt like I could have an argument, it would be the total system performance argument.
Love it. Yeah. And I think that some of us who are fans of Larry Marine can start to see a lot of the human factors influences on the things we've learned from Larry. We've got 2 more questions, and then we probably need to wrap up because I've promised to try to keep these around half an hour, knowing that they'll run a little late. So let's take these 2 questions. Dinora says, another question from me. How do you, if at all, balance between critical business questions, like the business won't survive if you don't solve this, versus discovery research or innovation, which might not be required now or could slow the team down, but help us later on?
I don't think I have ever been in a situation where I had that. But I mean, again, it's prioritization. And I also don't separate the two that often. That I've done in the course of usability testing or directive testing, directive research, I have found insights that have led to new innovations and things of that nature. So I can't say how I would balance the two because I've never been forced to prioritize between the two. Knock on wood. But there's always everything in life is trade-off decisions. I tell my kid this all the time. I tell people who want to move to Ireland, this life is trade-off decisions, and what's important to you more. And if you're creative, there's always a way to do both. Now you can't do both well or at the highest level, but you can make a trade-off between the two. And it just, without more context, it would be hard to go into any more detail on that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And now that everyone knows we're trying to wrap up, all the questions came out. So it looks like we'll be running a little late. We've got 3 more questions, then I've got a closing question. So let's go with Malika's question, which is, from your experience, how many participants or examples are needed to persuade stakeholders to welcome change? Or is it more about storytelling?
Well, if we're talking about participants in a test, I have a whole paper on Medium about effect size and power analysis and saturation in the qualitative space. So I tell people, if after this 6th interview, you've heard you're bored from talking to people because you're hearing the same thing over and over again, you've got all the information you need. If you're still like, oh, wow, I learned something new from that 6th participant, then there's something that you didn't understand, and you need to figure out what it is about the demographics of people, the psychographics of those individuals, their personas, whatever you want to call it, to keep interviewing more. If you're doing quantitative research, power analysis is your friend, and that can tell you how many people you need to get at what statistical level and which statistical confidence. In terms of stakeholders, it is all about storytelling. Now, and this is also about stakeholder analysis, knowing, do numbers move this person or these people, or do stories, and what is the lever that's important to them, and finding that lever, it's usually a combination of letters, and positioning what you have to put forward that way. So I have had stakeholders who are quantitative, but you still have to tell the story and why around those numbers, and figuring out what numbers are the ones that are going to move them.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. We just did a study where I'm working, and sorry, Google's talking to me. And we were starting to hear a lot of the same things, and participant 18 blew the whole thing wide open. And so, that doesn't mean you always have to meet 18 or 20, but I'm always nervous about stopping around 6. No offense. I'm always like, Oh no, who didn't I talk to yet?
I mean, when I say 6, I don't mean just 6 random people. Like that, you have to have done some amount of analysis beforehand and gone, there are these kinds of users and these kind of users and these kinds of users. So if you talk to 6 random people, most likely they are not disabled, and they are not going to tell you anything about a disabled person's experience with the technology. So it's you have to be smart about that sample, and 6 is the starting point.
Now that I think about it, you've got a really good point, because we had 2 different buckets that we were pulling from for this group, and she was probably the 7th or 8th from one of the buckets, and so the 6 might not be too far off. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No,
we got 2 more questions. Miguel says, as a change agent, how do you prove to an organization that they should have to change to improve their processes when they don't know and they don't realize they need it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all about what are the levers that are important to them, and how are they persuaded? Everybody's different. And so collecting data, whether it's quant or qual, depending on the individual, about where the process can be improved, and then examples of where the process already works and is being done are good things. If it's, figuring out what is the thing that they need to improve themselves. And then showcasing why it needs to be improved where you are and how others have improved it by making this change.
Business case.
Yeah.
Good old business case. Yeah, thank you for that. We've got Anne's question, and then I'm going to ask a closing question. Oh, bye, Miguel. Thanks for coming. Anne says, what are some key factors that user research needs to focus on to ensure these new AI-driven products remain user-friendly, ethical, and accessible to all, especially given the push of AI products from the sake of being able to say it's an AI product?
Oh, there's a lot in there.
I'm good at that.
Yeah. So the key factors the user research needs to focus on. I think in the case of AI, you really need to think about socio-technical systems and the fact that there are your direct users, and then there are indirect users of the system, or humans that are going to be affected by it. I think of things like the algorithm in Michigan that flagged a number of people as lying about their needs for unemployment, and how the knock-on effects. They were not the people using the AI system, the algorithm. It was folks in the welfare benefits office, I think it was, in Michigan. But thinking about who else is going to be affected and those knock-on effects is critical. And this is where, again, doing failure mode assessments and function allocation are critical. And then, if that's too far down the road, which it might very well be, if you feel confident in it, it's always rough, but feeling confident in it, why AI? What is the benefit that AI gives to the user or to this problem that can't be solved by other things? And perhaps even going down, what are the costs of using AI in this product, and comparing that cost-benefit analysis of using AI versus something else, depending on what it is, because AI might be the right solution.
Or might not. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the great perspectives and critical thinking. And my closing question for you, and sorry we've run a little late today. I know some people have had to drop, probably from meetings at the half hour, but advice in this unfortunate job climate, if someone wanted to get into UX research or human factors type of work like you're doing, what type of advice might you have for someone hoping to enter this nowish?
I'd ask why nowish is important. Because, yeah, truth be told, I'm looking for my next role. So,
hire Rebecca.
Yes. Nowish. I would try and find a good course. There are some short ones out there. I don't have any connection to it, but the University of Michigan, I know, has a 6-week summer course on human factors, and it really gives you a good context of the things that are known. Reading, I have a book list on LinkedIn that has a lot of great stuff for getting your feet wet into it. But the more you can study cognition and perception and research methods in behavioral science, the stronger you're going to be a candidate and be able to be more creative in how you approach new technologies and new research questions.
All right. Good luck to everybody. Thanks for the recommendation of the University of Michigan Human Factors course. I must say, as always, not sponsored. I haven't taken the course. I
haven't either. I just know.
It could suck. It could be awesome. We don't know, or at least I don't know, but hopefully this has given some people some ideas of what to look into, even to expand your knowledge and horizons in research. And I think human factors is always worth studying. Rebecca, any last comments you want to make, or where can people find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Medium. It's really easy. Rebecca Grier. There's not that many of us in the world. So
super. And just for accessibility and other reasons, I'm just going to spell your name. It is Rebecca, last name Grier. And I think on LinkedIn, it then says PhD. You go. Okay. Thank you again for being the first of our Tell Me About Your Job series. And I hope that everybody will check out the events calendar. We've got more of these coming with some startup people, some healthcare specialists, a service designer. I've been planning so many webinars for everybody. They're all free, and most of them will be here on Google Meet. So you got to check the calendar. And we're going to be doing 1 or 2 a week for the next at least 2 months. So come learn stuff, y'all. All right, I'm going to press the stop recording button, but thank you again to everybody for coming, and special thanks to Rebecca.